So Andrew Yang was the first Asian American presidential candidate we've ever had, and he brought attention to Asian American voters who are really ignored often in a lot of political campaigns and discussions. In your opinion, how did his candidacy affect the political landscape? And do you think that it brought more attention to Asian American voters and the issues that they care about and the issues that impact them?
I think that especially with Andrew Yang as a candidate, a lot of youth in particular were interested in politics. They became more engaged, mainly because they saw themselves. And I cannot stress enough the importance of representation of people who look like you in positions such as government positions, right? So with that being said, it definitely drew a lot more interest and engagement, especially with having Andrew Yang as one of the candidates. But what I will say is that typically in a lot of previous elections, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders specifically often aren't targeted, and that's largely due to poor systems created, against people of color that disproportionately affect people of color. And that also meant
so you mentioned the model minority myth. How do you exactly define the model minority myth? Because it seems that kind of different people define it in different ways. Could you just, as well as for the listeners, just give a definition for it?
So the model minority myth is essentially a system that states that, well, in this case, a minority, in this case is Asian, are able to succeed and they're able to prosper in a community despite being a person of color or a people of color. And with that being said, of course, the model minority myth sounds pretty, it's like, wow, it's great that they're being successful. But unfortunately, that is also a great way to pit Asians against other people of color and other minority groups, which unfortunately we can see a lot of today, right? And it also sets a lot of standards and boxes Asians into this persona or cookie cutter of what they deem to be successful and hardworking, law-abiding, and quiet. Not really the advocate or the activist, but rather someone who takes a seat back and is just a model.
Right. So how has the model minority myth played a role in your own life?
As for me, I would say that the model minority myth has affected how I view myself and also the people around me. So a big part of growing up is, for me, battling with the stereotype, because I have always wanted to become an activist. I worked towards becoming an advocate, especially in a lot of policy making recently. But for me, when you grow up in a community that is drenched in a way that is really encapsulated by this model minority myth that is intergenerational, because not a lot of people know about it, then it becomes second nature. It makes you feel like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. I am supposed to fit these standards. This is what I care about. This is all I need. And rather than creating my own path, I felt like I had to fit this persona of myself, which would inevitably also create chaos, really, internalized chaos, because I would not know how to act, honestly, whether to be myself or to be a more toned down, only focused on STEM. And I love STEM work, I'm not going to lie, I do it in my free time, quite literally, but being pressured into that is not something that I would have liked to experience. And I think a lot of students, especially who are Asian, have felt that pressure.
Right. And just one more question before I again pass it off to Marielle. what do you think about, so giving out just a little bit of a basis for the listeners, too. There was that big thing on, I think, Twitter, where somebody posted a prom dress and somebody responded, you know, my culture is not your prom dress. And it started this huge discussion about integration of different cultures into the kind of American melting pot, and how America's culture kind of shifts around and takes things from other groups and forms its own thing. And of course, other countries have done that. Canada has done that. The UK has kind of done that in a way with their, the country's favorite food has recently changed from fish and chips to curry, you know, and that was a big surprise. How do you feel about, kind of as more people are immigrating from Asia to America, how do you feel about Americans taking part in Asian culture?
So this comes down to the true debate of cultural appropriation versus appreciation, right? And to be honest, appreciating one's culture is what we all want. I have no problem with people partaking in Asian culture as long as they respect it and aren't cherry picking what they like and don't like. So for example, one big thing that you will commonly see is the Qingdao dress that is used, especially in fashion. There's this big debate on, is this cultural appropriation if someone wears it to a dance, for example? And there's a difference between wearing it there's a difference between wearing it and, in a sense, being contradictory with your own viewpoints on other parts of the culture. So a big part with cultural appropriation is you don't appreciate it on the culture sometimes, but you appreciate it more on other people who are not necessarily from that racial group.
Right. Okay. Mary, you want to take it from here?
Yeah. So going off this discussion of cultural appropriation versus appreciation, I know here on the West Coast, there's a lot of parts of Asian culture that have become really big, really trendy, quote unquote, so to speak here, like boba tea, anime, a lot of Asian food on the West Coast. Do you think that we need to, along with appreciating those parts of the culture, do you think it's also important that we, as people who are trying to be good allies, also take the time to learn about the other parts of the culture that a lot of the time we tend to ignore because we don't like, because they're different, because they're uncomfortable? Because wouldn't that be kind of necessary in order to truly appreciate the culture, not just cherry pick, like you said, the parts we like and the parts that are cool and trendy and cute?
Absolutely. And I think this is true for everyone. And it can be hard to see when you don't know what exactly you're cherry picking. So it is truly important to take the time to learn about other people's cultures. And if you indulge yourself in any of these, which is honestly just an excuse, but you know, if you indulge yourself in any of these parts of other cultures, I believe that it really is necessary to respect other people, although that should be the baseline, even without these other cultural aspects. But that being said, it should give people a reason to start learning more.
That's awesome. And I just have one more question, kind of looping back to a little bit of what you said at the beginning and talking about like the internalization of the model minority myth. Do you see kind of a difference, maybe generationally, between like you and your parents in how you've internalized that and how like you're trying to change that, how you view yourself versus how older generations see themselves?
Absolutely. Now, this will go into intergenerational trauma as well. And this is when essentially, let's say, for example, my parents have experienced something and they somewhat pass it on, their experiences, kind of their trauma towards me. And I would say that these differences are even visible within my family, as in myself and then my older siblings and my parents. So my siblings have a 10-year gap with me. So that's around a decade. And even then, I think the openness of our communities, how society has treated Asian culture, and also breaking down the model minority myth more in school. I know my school in particular has a anti-racism class that we are required to take, and having those implemented can show you a lot about other people who you probably have never really thought a lot about. So even having those new implementations shows you how much of a gap and a difference there is.
Did you enjoy these clips? Want to hear the rest of the episode? Click the links below to listen to the full episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other popular streaming apps. Remember to support us. You can do this by checking out our Instagram pages at YIP Institute and at Watch Verbum. You can also look at our website at www.yipinstitute.com. Make sure to follow our page as we upload weekly. Have a good day.